Well, that last session was pretty powerful, don't you think? Yes, gives us something to think about. So I'm Cheryl Bergstaller, and I've come from the University of Washington in Seattle. It was nice to come down here for a nice sunny day. It was a little rainy up there, and surprise, surprise, right? We do have some very nice days in Seattle. We don't like to tell people that because we're afraid they'll move in, and the traffic is already too bad up there, so I won't go into that. Well, I'm here to talk about inclusive excellence. Let's talk about inclusive, to kind of think about some ways we can make your campus and ours more inclusive of individuals from various groups. I think one of the nice things here is you have some top-down support, statements of support that can lead to events like this one, which I would love to replicate at our campus, by the way. I don't think we're quite ready for that yet. Imagine a University of Colorado Boulder campus where individual differences are viewed as a key strength of our university, that we would look at the views of people with different perspectives coming to the table as being a positive thing. Another thing he said is the challenge at hand, so here we get to the application, is to engage in a comprehensive effort to craft a strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusive excellence. Imagine a campus where people are not singled out or marginalized because of their differences. Imagine what we could achieve as a university if this was our everyday reality. Pretty strong statements. I think we can even go a step farther by saying that maybe we could have a vision where if we just say excellence all by itself, that would always imply inclusiveness, that there is no excellence without being inclusive. So that's where we want to get to. I'm just going to take a look at inclusiveness from various lenses and tie in some activities we're doing at our campus and yours, and how we might expand on those efforts. So if we look at inclusiveness, we're looking at things we want to do. We have to do things proactively and reactively. In other words, we want to create an inclusive environment, but then we also want to be reactive when we see injustice occurring, and we need to make changes on the fly. We need to make individual choices in what we do. Both people from underrepresented groups and from the majority groups, simply everyone that's involved with the university. And then there are some institutional choices that can be made that can contribute to inclusiveness. So you've heard in sessions you've been in yesterday and today, including the last one, a lot of ideas on things we can do. This is your time to step up and give your voice to the university in making some of these things happen. So you'll see some Post-its in front of you, and the green Post-it is for writing something, it's kind of greenish yellow, on there, one thing, a lot of things, whatever, that you personally will do to make CU Boulder more inclusive. So what are the things that you can think of already, but also maybe touching on some of the things I'm going to talk about for the next 45 minutes or so that you can do personally, what you could do. And this is very action-oriented, so just kind of thinking about these things isn't exactly what we're looking for there. We're looking for things that you would actually do. But not wanting to stop there, of course. On the pink one, we make these pink ones to draw attention, things that the institution should be doing to be more inclusive. Some ideas came up in the last session, and I've heard other ideas in conversations regarding this event. Well, we ought to do this, we ought to do this. Well, here's your idea, your opportunity to put that on a pink sheet, and we have enough of these that you can use several. But I'd like everybody to contribute at least one thing on a green Post-it and one thing on a pink one. And be very specific. Your institution is going to create a list of these things and give them consideration. So any idea that you have will be considered. Now, your Post-its is your ticket to get out of this room. I used to be a middle school teacher, so I kind of have these strategies to get people to do things. And so if you look at the back of the room there, on each side of the exits, there is a 3M sheet for green responses and pink responses. So your ticket to get out of this room is to put at least one pink Post-it up there and one green Post-it. And we'll have a lot of really great ideas from this particular group when we do that, I'm sure. Okay, so what can we learn about inclusiveness? We're going to take a look at inclusiveness through a variety of lenses. That include, my first one is a bicycle built for two. Then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my quest to become a patrol boy, my history, about history in general, about recent headlines, about people with disabilities, about universal design, about accessibility of IT, and I'm even going to end with something that we've learned from kindergarten. So some examples from CU Boulder and the UW is we'll talk about this type of event and others where we've actually done some of these things in these various contexts, and talking about universal design, accessible IT, and broaden our view of that. Okay, let's start with the bicycle. This is called the Convergent Bicycle. It actually comes from the catalog of Unfindable Objects from 1969. It has a lot of really interesting things in there, so if you want to kind of enjoy looking at kind of crazy projects, you can look at that book. But if you notice that we have a bicycle made for two, but they're kind of pointing, the writers are pointing this at each other. And so it's just a simple idea, but it's not enough. I mean, it's pretty clear from what we said in the last session, others, it's not enough to just have us in the room for people to be together physically. We need to be able to, we need to move in the right direction. And that doesn't mean that we have the same ideas on how we're going to accomplish things, but we have the vision that is the same of inclusive excellence. And when we're arguing about something or we have difference of opinions, it needs to be reinforced at times that we have the same vision, but we have different ways that we think we should go to reach it. And so we need groups here on your campus and ours working together to promote accessible IT, which your campus is one of the leaders in the country, and ours is too, by the way. And we can learn from some of those activities that have taken place in that domain, and then extend that to some other exclusive areas and inclusive areas. So here's this little story about me and my quest to become a patrol boy. This is a simple little story, but kind of has some relevance here. When I grew up in the 50s and went through elementary school and I hit 6th grade, I had been looking at a job that I wanted very much, because the 6th graders got a chance to be patrol boys. And so I went to apply to be a patrol boy when I was old enough to do so, and was told by the principal, well, it's patrol boy. You're a girl, you can't be a patrol boy. And so I've been watching the guys doing it all this time. My dad was a used car dealer, so I was used to guys in the shop and stuff, so that didn't bother me. I said, I know I can do that job. I actually like the uniform, actually. I thought that little sash would be very cool to wear, and the power and responsibility. And so he told me that, it's just girls aren't eligible. And I said, well, I can do it. I can do this, that, whatever. Finally, what he said is, well, girls aren't strong enough to be patrol boys. And I remember walking down the hall back to my class, and what I got from that was, and what came to mind was, wow, even people in powerful positions can be wrong. Because I knew I was right, and I knew he was wrong. And I went on to do other things. I chose other things. But how many people get really discouraged and then think, well, I guess I'm not worthy. I can't do that thing. I'm going to tell a little bit more about the story later, but that's where I ended up there. So what can we use from history? What can we learn from history of how we treat people with human differences? This is about people with disabilities, but you'll see it applies to a lot of other people too. Oh, well, we have had times in our history where we just eliminate people or exclude them totally from society. Then we can segregate people. We'll keep them over here, so separate but sort of equal, but then we don't have to deal with the diversity that's around us. In the case of people with disabilities, we went through the last century. Well, let's cure them. We'll fix them. We can fix them so that they'll be like the rest of us, so they'll be, quote, normal. So we work on that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But then, well, we can't quite cure them, so let's rehabilitate them. So we will fix them so that they can participate in whatever that is we're offering. And we might have to provide an accommodation here or there to make sure that that happens. Notice all of these things, the cure, rehabilitate, accommodate, focus on the individual, the person with a disability, and how we can work with them to make things right. But we have evolved from that. And the movements for people with disabilities have adopted some practices for other civil rights movements. And we're now at a social justice stage where we have a civil right. People with disabilities have a civil right, just like everyone else, to be included in things. And that leads to activities that promote inclusive access and universal design, what we're talking about today. So if we look at inclusiveness, it's an environment that lets people in. Okay, that's important, that we can get in. But then, more importantly, it makes them feel welcome, that we want them there. It's not just that we allow them to participate in whatever we're offering. So what can we learn from recent headlines? I decided to look through the Chronicle of Higher Education headlines for over the last few months, about the last year, to see, well, without even looking at the articles, what do the headlines tell us about diversity? Here are a few. Asian American groups accuse an institution, I'm not putting the schools in there because I don't want you to be preoccupied by that, by bias in admissions. Why Native students often struggle. And such administrator finds racist note under his office door. Such and such institution censures a professor who attended a Halloween party in blackface. How 3 college presidents are trying to move their campuses past racial tensions. Challenges facing low-income female students. Micro barriers loom large for first-generation students. Such and such institution strives to help first-generation students. Academics and sexual minorities can feel a need to stay closeted. A transgender student anticipates college. One campus to fire employees who support gay marriage. Colleges lean on LGBT centers, apparently to solve problems in that area. College facilities evolve from accommodation to inclusivity. How one college helps students with learning disabilities. Are you being rigorous or just intolerant? They're all articles. How 4 professors built careers despite mental health struggles. How a classroom interaction led a student to speak out on microaggressions. How one campus is trying to diversify its Greek organizations. What safe spaces really look like. Tips for inclusive teaching. The struggle for diversity starts at the top. And this last one I put in red because I think it kind of summarizes everything, what the need is, and demand surges for diversity consultants. So if you are inclined in that area, you might want to look into some opportunities across the nation. This is probably 1/3 of the titles that were about diversity. So diversity is a topic that's covered a lot in the Chronicle of Higher Education, as in other publications, which is relatively new, by the way. It'd be interesting to study, some of you students, to go through all those Chronicles of Higher Ed over the years and see how those numbers even look, and what types of diversity is being recognized. So there are a lot of different groups. We learn that from this list. We can ask ourselves, well, who's not at the table? Who are we not thinking about as an underrepresented group here in Boulder and at the University of Washington, to be always asking ourselves, well, what other groups are feeling that they're not fully included in our campus? Another thing that some of these suggest in some of the articles themselves is some of the things that we've learned in areas where we spent a little more time in, say, intercultural competence. Not that we're perfect about that, but some of those things that we have learned as academics or practitioners could be applied to other groups as well, like people with disabilities. You have here on campus a Diverse Learners Awareness Week last spring that I attended, and that was a great opportunity to really recognize all these different groups. Talking about microaggressions and micro barriers, they're mentioned earlier in this program, but also in some of those titles. These are just, if you haven't heard that before, they're just subtle offensive comments and actions directed at a non-dominant group that reinforce a stereotype. There are a lot of articles and examples on the internet. One picture I picked up, why do you sound white? You know, why would you ask somebody that question? But a lot of things like that can happen. Intersectionality, overlapping or intersecting social identities and related systems of oppression, dominance, or discrimination. There are a lot of overlaps. There are privileges and penalties associated with sometimes an individual group, but even more so or less so with the overlap of multiple identities. And there's an importance of accepting uncertainty. As mentioned in the last talk, it's really important to listen, but it's also important for us to recognize that we can never fully understand the life of someone else. And that's okay. That's why we have to listen. And so looking again at all these different overlaps and intersections, and in different situations, a person's identity might be more defined by themselves by one of their identities more than another, depending on what the situation is. And people with multiple identities can bring complication to some of the things that we think about. Individuals with disabilities, for instance, if they're from a very affluent family where they've had resources for a lot of the services they need and don't have to depend on the schools to provide them, that's not the same as a student with a disability from a low-income family who hasn't had those opportunities. And also there's some interesting intersections that you might not think about. When I used to teach mathematics, and when I was teaching calculus, one time I caught an Asian student, a male student, cheating in my class. I mean, very obviously cheating. I wasn't even looking for it. It became obvious that he was cheating. And so when I brought that up to him, he started crying, actually, and told me the pressure there is on being a male Asian student who is not skilled in mathematics. And so some issues like that come up, that he was getting extra pressure because of the stereotypical Asian student who's really good at math and science. So being aware and listening, I learned a lot listening to him, and that's about mostly what I did in that conversation, but I hadn't thought about it. But it was important that I listened rather than just said, well, you're going to get a lower grade on this exam because I caught you cheating, but really understand the pressure that he was under. So what can we learn from students with disabilities? Well, we're going to see a short video, and this was actually put together by some of our college students with disabilities, and this was totally their words and how they wanted to present this very short video.
Hi guys. Hey. How's it going? Good. Hi, my name's Anita. I'm a college student and a full-time wheelchair user, and today I am at the UW campus interviewing people with disabilities. What is it like to be a wheelchair user?
I don't really see it as much different than walking, although I have to make sure things are accessible before going to them, and some people on the street might look at me like I'm different, but I don't see myself as different.
I have myotonic muscular dystrophy.
And how does that affect you in your day-to-day life?
I just can't walk as far as a normal person can, or I can't lift up heavy things, or I can't talk as normal.
I have Stargardt's disease, which is a macular degeneration, which affects my central vision. So I have a blind spot in the middle of my vision, so I use the outside of my eyes to see.
Khalees, what is it like to have a learning disability?
I mean, it's not really like anything. I know I struggle a lot in school and I can get extra help on things, but it's more of when I don't really tell people about it, and then so when I do, they're just like, but you seem so normal. And I'm like, well, what is normal in their sense? Because I like to believe that no one is normal. Everyone's like special in their own way.
Carl, what are some assumptions that people may make about you?
Some people may think that since I'm in a wheelchair, I have a mental disability as well as a physical disability, but that's not true.
When you tell people about your disability, what are some common reactions you get, or faces and looks you get as you're interacting on your day-to-day life?
People don't really ask class, they usually try to avoid me in some ways, or they give me a weird look, like, oh, she's weird, or she's not normal.
What are some common reactions you get from people when you tell them about your disability?
I get, oh, you're so brave, you're so inspirational a lot. Just because I can't see as well as other people, they think that me doing things on my own, walking across the street by myself, they think that that's inspirational, whereas if anyone else would to do it, it would just be a normal everyday occurrence.
I just have a challenge, and it's just something I have to face every day, which isn't bad for me actually, because I can work my way around it, and it made me the person I am today.
How does this disability affect your interactions in day-to-day life?
I don't think personally, for me, it doesn't make my interactions toward other people different, because I treat everyone the same as if I had normal vision, and I try to be as approachable and normal as possible, and I'm pretty open about my disability, because I think if people know, then they're more likely to understand why I do things the way I do.
The students featured in this video are participants in the Do It Scholars Program, where youth with disabilities prepare for college and careers. Notice that we have a caption, but also at the end that the credits are actually spoken, so that the content of this video is accessible to people who are deaf or people who are blind. And that's part of our effort to apply an inclusive design. It means that I don't have to know, and I don't know actually, if any of you are deaf or any of you are blind. I know that video is fully accessible to you, the content of it. An interesting thing about the video, which shows how we need to listen to various voices, is those kids kind of came up with their definition or their view of normal, and they use that. And then the one student says, "Well, nobody's normal." You know, I kind of look at the other way. Well, we're all normal, and we're all, you know, why wouldn't we be normal? A disability is something that many people have, and we're alive and in the world and doing things. I mean, what is normal? But it's certainly something that everyone can experience either now or in the future. So we'd like to consider ability on a continuum rather than the medical model, which is this is the definition of your disability and these are your strengths and weaknesses. That you need to do probably to get services from the Disability Services Office, but most of us aren't working in that office. We're just working with people day to day. So I like to think of ability on a continuum where way off in the left of this arrow, we're not able to do something. Way on the right, we're able to do something. And so the young man in the video who's talking about his visual impairment, right now he's kind of toward the not able, but he has some sight at this time. And so all of us fit in this somewhere. Blindness is just defined as some point on this line that we don't really need to know about. And everyone has an ability to hear this on this timeline. Some hear exceptionally well, some not so well, but also the ability to walk and the ability to read print, to write with a pen or a pencil, to communicate verbally, to tune out distraction, to learn. All these things are part of all of us. We all have these abilities that we face. And so looking at individuals with disabilities then and other groups, as you know, often people with disabilities will show this little sign here I have up here, nothing about us without us. So important when we're communicating with individuals from various groups is to listen to everyone that has their voice. We give them their voice to say whatever is important to them, but also to recognize that no one person speaks for the whole community. This comes up out a lot in the disability community, where we'll have an advisory board, and well, we have to have a person with a disability on this board, so we have the token student in a wheelchair as if they represent the whole group. This is true of other groups as well, but we need to remind ourselves that it's important to have that representation, but they really are speaking their own experience. And also that membership might not be obvious. Things like learning disabilities, attention deficits, autism spectrum disorders and so forth, you can't really see them. Sometimes in our activities, we'll be on campus with a group of students with disabilities, and people know what I do. We have summer camps for kids with disabilities, and often they'll say things like, well, where do you get those nice young students to help those kids with disabilities you're working with? And I said, well, what nice young students are you talking about? Well, they're talking about the students who have learning disabilities and other disabilities that are invisible. And so people assume that you'll be able to tell if a person has a disability, but that's true of other groups as well. You can't always tell. We need to also value the perspectives of allies. These can be people that are associated with the person with a disability or not. But their views are important as well. Even people that have negative attitudes toward certain groups, we need to hear what they're saying. In the case of disability, for instance, I talk to faculty a lot, and sometimes they can sound very negative. Well, I don't think this student belongs in my class, this student with a learning disability. And when you get to talking to them, it's mainly because they're uncomfortable with the disability. They don't really know exactly what they should be doing, and they think they should be doing more than they're really doing, and maybe that's not the issue. But that's important too for us to know that so that we can help maybe change that situation. Be sure to talk directly to the person you're communicating with. In the disabled community, it's widely reported that people don't talk to them. So if there's a person in a wheelchair, the waitress might ask the able-bodied person what that person wants to eat, for instance, even though they're an adult. Individuals that are using sign language interpreters, to be able to be sure that you look at the person who you're communicating with, not at the sign language interpreter. And then not excluding, being careful not to exclude subgroups of a group. For instance, one example of this is on our campus where we had a group that was really focused on women in engineering. And a person joined that group who happened to be deaf. And their first reaction was kind of, oh, well, you need to go talk to my program, which is called Do It. Pushing that person to our group, which works with individuals with disabilities, not really embracing that young woman as also part of their community. So we need to be careful of that. Sometimes we'll have projects that work with students with learning disabilities, but don't work with students who have other types of disabilities. I don't mind that as long as they're willing to work with a student who's blind and has a learning disability, or in a wheelchair and has a learning disability, but sometimes that's not the case. So look at the subgroups of the group that you're maybe focused on in your club or your activity or whatever. And then using accurate, non-judgmental language. Words like confined to a wheelchair, for instance. It's just not accurate, first of all. I have known a lot of people who use wheelchairs. I've never met one who is confined to a wheelchair. They go to bed at night and whatever. They're not confined to the wheelchair. And such an emotionally charged word for a wheelchair. When you think about it, a wheelchair isn't confining. It's actually liberating. If you can't walk or can't walk very far, having a wheelchair gives you mobility. Where confined to a wheelchair implies that it's something that's limiting you in some way. So the wheelchair's getting kind of a bad rap for some reason in those cases. Another one that often comes up in the disabled community is suffers from. He suffers from cerebral palsy. Now, who am I to say that this person is suffering from something? I don't know that. I have no idea whether that person feels like they're suffering. If they want to say they're suffering from that, that's fine. But we shouldn't put that judgment. And there might be some cases where it's obvious, like, just up skiing and you broke your leg and are great at pain. You might say, oh, he's suffering from this pain. But in most cases, when that term is used with people with disabilities, it isn't justified. We need to take a look at images, and this goes for all underrepresented groups. But if we look at the images that are typically used by regarding people with disabilities, sometimes they're like the first image here, where you have a person pushing the wheelchair. That person looks very dependent on that person, also looks kind of solemn. Where the other two pictures show a person in a wheelchair who's actually interacting, looks like in a job situation, and as a parent. And so showing underrepresented groups in all life activities, not stereotyping them. So inclusiveness, what can we learn from the universal design paradigm? We can use the universal design, which came about in the architectural design of facilities, but we can apply it to all aspects of what we're doing here and at the University of Washington. What it means is the design of products and environments to be usable by all people to the greatest extent possible without the need for adaptation or specialized design. So being proactive in creating all that we do to be welcoming and accessible to everyone. Now, universal design, sometimes called inclusive design. I actually prefer inclusive design, but there's one negative aspect about that is it's kind of a term that's used in K-12 education to mean something quite different in special education. So universal design is sometimes used to mean the same thing, barrier-free design, design for all, accessible design. These are terms that are used in the United States, but also across the world for similar things. But when I use the term universal design, I think of something that is accessible, could be physically accessible or accessible in other ways to everyone, proactively, but it's also usable. For instance, technology, let's say websites can be designed to be accessible to people with disabilities, but websites or software, sometimes they're made accessible with a whole bunch of extra things that the person who's blind using a screen reader is using to access that software or website. And so they have to memorize a whole bunch of things. One product that we're using at our university, a person who works for me who's blind says he has to memorize 100 shortcuts in order to fully operate that software. It's technically accessible to him. He can technically get to all the features of that software, but it isn't usable. That's not a usable product. And then inclusive is part of universal design in everything that we do. So our goal then, making our courses, our services, our IT, our physical spaces welcoming and accessible and usable for everyone. So this approach then is, rather than an individual conforming to a campus offering, which is often the case for individuals that are in underrepresented groups, we require with universal design that the campus expects and prepares for all types of diversity. For instance, we have students who are blind on our campus, of course, and I'd like to see the day when a faculty member comes up to me as we're talking on campus and say, oh, I have a blind student in my class. I'm really looking forward to this because we haven't really explored how individuals who are blind can appreciate art, if it's an art class or something like that. That we really are expecting a student to come, we're happy that they're there, and we engage with them fully. So applying universal design to learning activities, providing multiple ways for students to gain knowledge. There isn't just one way to learn something. You can use videos, you can use text-based resources, experiential activities, small group discussions, having a lot of ways for students to gain knowledge. Also having a lot of different ways for them to interact. In a class that I'm teaching where I have students, often just tends to be students from China, they have difficulty interacting in class, or they're embarrassed because of their English skills. And so I provide opportunities in class for them to interact, small groups and large groups as well. But we also have online communication, and those students will tend to interact more in that environment, the electronic environment. So we do both. And providing a lot of different ways for people to demonstrate what they know, besides just the standard multiple choice test or essay test. Can you test the students in other ways? So I like this quote, which says, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it's stupid. And this was Einstein who said that. He's a pretty smart guy, I think. But we need to think about our activities in education, educational activities, and see how everyone can be more included in those things. Universal design can be applied to anything else. And just quickly, if you had a student service or you had a student-run organization, that you plan for diversity. And so you plan for having students with a wide variety of characteristics in your group. And so if it's a special interest group for students who have first-generation college students, for instance, if there's a group for them, that you make sure that people from all these underrepresented groups feel welcome in that opportunity. We have a program in the summer that prepares students who are new to college and generally first-generation college students to prepare for the college environment. And a while back, one of the participants in my program who had a disability enrolled in that program, was accepted into that program, and they had to do a lot of scurrying around. They did, by the way, but it was like they had never thought of the fact that a student with a disability might enroll in that program. So thinking about your policies and your planning and your evaluation, I know in the case of IT on your campus, you have dealt with a lot of the policies and the processes as far as assuring that your IT is accessible to students with disabilities. And so doing that in every case. Making sure physical environments and products are accessible. We, for instance, in the DO-IT office, the Disabilities, Opportunities, Internetworking, and Technology office, we have a counter which has two different heights, one for a seated position and one for a standing position. And we also put our handout bins at a level that people can access them from a seated position. Information resources and technology, we've talked about some of that in this program. Apple was here earlier. For those who in that session got to hear about making technology accessible, but also web resources and so forth. And then staff training. If a person comes up and they have a special requirement, in the case of a disability, for instance, that they would like an alternative format for a document or need a sign language interpreter, the staff should be prepared to say something other than, well, I don't know. Now, even if you have to engage another person, make sure that you know how to respond to that. Goes back to that welcoming environment. A student with a disability is not going to feel welcome if the moment they ask for some assistance, they're kind of presented with, well, I don't know, it's not really my problem. I don't know, I didn't get training on that. Come back later. I mean, it's real time. They're there, and we need to respond positively. And then events to make sure that they're welcoming and accessible to everyone who might want to engage. Universal design then, what is it? Well, it's an attitude. It's kind of an attitude that everyone is welcome here and we're going to think about you before you come. It values, it's a goal, it's a process, it values diversity, but that's not enough. It values diversity, so we want to get everyone, say, at our institution, we want to have a diverse group, but also equity so that they have an equivalent experience as other people and an opportunity to do so, and inclusion, that we don't have to have segregated groups, but we can work together. Promotes best practices, does not lower standards. In case of an academic class, for instance, it's proactive, but also can be implemented incrementally. So your group or your class, you can think about some things you can do initially. For instance, if you have videos involved, get them captioned. Learn how to do that. You actually have a caption service on your campus where you might be able to get them captioned for free. But explore that opportunity and make that happen. It gives a very strong statement to students who are deaf when they're captioned videos. We caption all of our videos, and people who are, even though we're a program where we work with students with disabilities, students who are deaf often remark, wow, I couldn't believe you had that video caption, because they typically are not. The other point there is that captions don't just benefit students who are deaf, they benefit students who are English is not their first language, and so they can see the text as well as hear the text. They benefit students that when the content is in an area where they're not familiar, for the words that you might use in chemistry or physics or something, and so they need to see the spelling of them as they're being presented. And if you caption your videos in your class, you open caption them or closed caption them, then a student can actually search through all those captions and find the topic they're interested in reviewing for a test. And so they benefit everyone. So universal design then benefits everyone, and it does have the side effect of minimizing the need for accommodations. Imagine in your class, if all your captions are videoed, you are captioned, all your videos are captioned, you might not need to provide special accommodations for a student who is deaf beyond that. So if we look at social justice and we look at universal design, inclusive design, if we think of these ways of thinking, they lead to new ways for us of thinking about access issues, about responsibilities of campus units, and the interactions between individuals and campus units. For instance, if we really employ universal design, we're asking the faculty member to take more responsibility than maybe they have in the past in making their class more inclusive, rather than thinking about the average students that will be participating in class, but thinking about the broad range of characteristics of the students that might show up for their class. So I used to teach middle school, as I said. I taught college, and you have to have a quiz every once in a while. So here's your quiz here, so listen up. A professor, along with 9 students, met to discuss a potential joint science fair. One student requested a sign language interpreter. When the invoice arrived, I like this one because my husband's an accounting professor, actually. Who's right about the cost of our interpreters here? Who's right about that cost? The accountant says, oh, wow, $80. This is like for 1 hour. You know, for one student? Wow, that's really expensive. But the leader, the professor, said, oh, no, you've got that wrong. It was only $8 per person, as to 10 people in the group. So which one are you going to vote for, A? B? Ah, right, you pass. On to the next lesson here. So this idea, when you think about it, for those of us that aren't using a sign language interpreter, Doesn't it really seem kind of strange that I would think that that interpreter is just for that person? Isn't it to help us all communicate with one another? It's for all of us. We have a Do-It program in Japan, and I go there periodically to give talks, and I always have a language interpreter, usually a sign language interpreter too, but a language interpreter. I don't get the feeling that they're thinking, oh, well, that interpreter, it's just for Cheryl. Yeah, it's because she doesn't speak Japanese, and so it's kind of her problem, so to speak. And so she can hear us. It's a two-way street. So we should think about interpreters in the same way with students with disabilities. Continuing that idea, when we look at physical environments, when we look at universal design and inclusiveness, I noticed your entrance out here. I like you have a really wide entrance, or when the sloped entrance, the wheelchair accessible entrance. Often that's not the case. These are two pictures on our campus where we have this first one was kind of a typical accessible door, right? You've got your 2 steps, and then you have this little sloping ramp on the left. So it's accessible. It is technically accessible. But the problem here is if I'm walking with one of my friends who's a wheelchair user, what happens when we get to this close to this entrance? We either part ways, I go one way, they go the other way, or I step behind them or in front of them. Not very inclusive. But on the right-hand side, we have a really wide ramp. It's the only way to get into the building from that side, and so everybody uses it, and it's wide enough so I can walk side by side with a person with a disability. So that's an example of inclusiveness. It goes beyond accessibility. And so if we look at universal design on a continuum, in these 3 pictures, we have someone opening a door. Looks like they're probably going to make it from their wheelchair opening that door. We have a button that we can push as another alternative, which makes it more accessible, but there are a lot of people with disabilities that can't push those buttons. And so these doors that we often expect at grocery stores these days that open automatically is a more accessible, universally designed product, more inclusive. So if we take a look at videos, if we take an uncaptioned video, it's kind of not accessible to some people. So we could provide an interpreter. My video today, we could have had an interpreter here to interpret it for those of you that would like to have an interpreter, and that would make it more accessible to a person who's deaf, but it's kind of hard to look at the interpreter and the video at the same time, as you might imagine. So we can put captions on that video. That makes it more accessible, more universally designed. And then we could add some added audio. I mentioned at the end of that video we have audio to just speak the credits at the end. And the part that says for more information, contact. And so that is an added step in making that more accessible. One more step, and we actually have a version of that video that's also audio described, where it adds some of the other visual content that a person who's blind would not be able to see. And in our videos on campus, on our website, you can choose to have that audio description placed on there as well. And so universal design is on a continuum. So when we design information technology, we can design it to be accessibly designed. That's on a continuum as well. We had a presentation earlier this morning in this room from Apple, and it reminded me back in the olden days, in the 80s, when 1984, when the Macintosh came out. It was a big blow to the blind community who were already using screen readers to read content on the screen. But pretty much everything, the PC, some of the stuff that was beginning to develop as far as telecommunications was all text-based back then. And so it was pretty easy for a screen reader without any fancy features to actually read that text. But we finally had a graphical user interface, and it was not, that graphics was not accessible to individuals who are using screen readers. Now, Apple by now has really turned the page, and they're very accessible and very in tune to accessibility. And so in the case of the iPhone, for instance, you can talk to Siri if you want, and Siri can talk to you, and there are a lot of accessibility features. We've grown to accept that, and we also see that these accessibility features, many of them early developed for people with disabilities, benefit all of us. And so there are basically 2 approaches then to providing access to technology. One is through assistive technology, which is designed specially for people with disabilities. But then there's the universal design approach, where we include those features in the design of the product, so we can get speech output, so we can change the size of the characters on the screen, change from white on black to black on white, and so forth. We'll always need assistive technology, but just like other accommodations, we want to minimize that. For instance, you can interface your computer or your phone to a device that would produce text into Braille and print that out on a Braille embosser. Now, that really, I don't think, is a device that we're all going to want to have to carry around with our computers or our cell phones. But what's important is that the cell phone developers and the computer developers make sure that their products can interface with those assistive technologies that are provided. And so if it's not built in, we just need to make sure that it's compatible. So we learn a lot from technology accessibility then, as far as making things universally designed and promoting inclusion. So the UW has done a lot of proactive efforts to promote accessible websites and PDFs, and your campus has as well. And as I mentioned earlier, you might want to generalize some of these to some of the other things that you're doing. But you're taking a very proactive approach as far as IT. You have your Disability Services Office that will make sure that students get special accommodations as they need them, but they work closely with the IT department to make sure that students with disabilities not only have access to IT, but they are able to use that IT effectively with or without assistive technology. So they're providing a role model for the whole country, your campus is, on how to do that. And so that's a big contribution, not only to your school, but to other schools that have benefited from the things that you're doing here. I mentioned earlier, you have a program whereby you can get captions placed on videos with some requirements, but freely, so your department doesn't have to pay for that, for instance, and you have to meet certain conditions and so forth to do that. You have assistants, professors have assistants here in making their courses accessible to students with disabilities, employing universal design strategies, and they can actually get some grants that they can use for going to conferences or whatever after they've done that, made that effort. You don't find that around many campuses in this country to be that proactive about things like that. So we're doing a smaller program in captioning videos, and we found that making it free and making some requirements for who's going to get free captions is really spreading the word about the value of captioning. But we do other things, like we've had captioning parties where we bring people together who want to learn how to caption videos. Those of you that use YouTube videos probably realize that you'll find captions on those videos, and some of them are really pretty funny to read. Well, the videos on YouTube can be captioned, but they're captioned with a computer generating those captions, and sometimes they can't understand what everybody's saying in that video. So you end up with some silly words and so forth. But what most people don't realize, apparently because there's so many that don't do this, is for the owner of that video, it's very easy to go in and edit those videos, those captions. And so so we spread the word in that regard. You can't go in and fix the captions on somebody else's video, but if you put a video up, you can go in and you can edit those captions so that they are what you want, what you've actually said in the video. So I've given you a lot of different lenses to look through to kind of think about inclusion and inclusive excellence. And a few examples on your campus and ours and other places where you might want to do that. But one book I like to turn to actually quite often, it's one of my favorite books, called All I Really Need to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. I just took a look at the kind of the list of things that came out in that book and some of the ones that I think apply to what we're doing here in our great effort to make our campuses and everything else more inclusive. One Plain Fair, share everything. You know, sometimes we hold on too much to the things that our identity provides for us, and we feel like there's going to be a loss if somebody else gets included. I even find this with groups that reach out to underrepresented groups, that, well, if we include this other group, maybe they're going to take more money from our diversity pot. You know, we need to share things. We need to support one another. Say you're sorry when you hurt somebody. You know, be open about talking, and be open about apologizing when you need to, and also, as I mentioned earlier, expressing your uncertainty about different issues that another person might face. Feel comfortable talking to them. My experience with students with disabilities, for example, is that they aren't real offended by questions people ask of them most of the time, even though they kind of look at them as being a little silly or weird. They're more upset about people not talking to them at all. And they just kind of look past them. And it's because people, I think, feel uncomfortable with the disability rather than just look at them in the eye and say hi. Also letting the person from the group that they happen to be part of tell their story. They have their own voice. People with disabilities have very strong, well, some do, like the rest of us, have very strong opinions about things, but they don't have the same opinion as somebody else with a disability. Even if the disability is the same. But it's okay to talk about those things, ask about those things. And then when you go out into the world, this actually touches me more after the events yesterday. When we go out in the world, watch out for traffic, hold hands, and stick together. All of you are interested in inclusion, as I am, and we need to stick together. And sometimes we need to find the common ground about what our goal is before, and not just stick with in the weeds where we might be arguing about who should get what and what should happen first or second or whatever. Look for what we have in common. And this Diversity and Inclusion Summit is an excellent example of doing that. So now I'm sure that you're all preoccupied with what I said earlier, that I was going to finish my story about my quest to become a patrol boy, because it certainly has just defined my whole life. It's really important. And remember the picture of this nice little kid in the 50s, you know, with his uniform, and that was my role model. That's what I wanted to be. And, you know, I couldn't be that, but I told my son, I have a son, he's 26 now, about my stories, some of my stories about things that women couldn't do back in the olden days. And he's just totally floored by it. I was like, what? Huh? How did that happen? Well, anyway, so he's heard these stories since he was pretty little, usually in a humorous way, by the way. But anyway, wouldn't you know it, when Travis was in 5th grade, which was the highest grade in his elementary school, he became a crossing guard. I don't call them patrol boys anymore, right? He got even a cooler outfit. Look at that hat and the vest and whatever. And so that was really cool. It's like, oh, wow, we're at a day now where girls are out there doing this stuff, and isn't that great? It's taken a long time, really, but we're there, right? Well, that's not the end of the story, though. In the 5th grade in his elementary school, the kids all went off to a camp for 5 days and stayed at this camp and whatever. He came home one day, and he said, this brings tears to my eyes. He came home one day, he says, Mom, we're going to camp, you know, later next month, and we talked to our coach for the crossing guards, and he said that we have to find someone to take our place as crossing guard when we're off the camp. Would you like to take my place? But I thought, that's my boy. What a sweet thing. And here I am. I did get to become a crossing guard. So sometimes we won't be able to reach the goal that we're trying to do this minute. We are in a marathon, not a sprint. And so sometimes you have to look maybe even to the next generation who will benefit from the things that we're doing, but it's all worth doing. So thank you for inviting me and being part of this group.
Thank you, Cheryl, for putting all these words together and giving us things to think about. Cheryl will be here for the next hour to talk in small groups, so please stick around and talk with Cheryl, ask questions, and just have some nice conversations. Thank you.